What is up, podcast land? Welcome to another episode of the Two Dates and a Dash podcast. I'm your host, Matt Cubbler. And before I introduce this amazing woman who wrote an amazing book about her brother, John Chapman, who is, when you're done hearing this podcast, you're going to realize what an American iconic hero he was and how deserving he was of the Congressional Medal of Honor. So I don't want to give too much away yet, but I can't wait to have this conversation with Lori. The podcast, where can you hear it? You can hear it anywhere that you listen to podcasts: Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, Castbox, Pandora, iTunes, iHeart, wherever you want to listen to podcasts. So if you could do me a favor, wherever you're listening to it, like, rate, and review the podcast. Leave a comment about a particular show that you found interesting. That'll all be very helpful to me, so I appreciate that. The show is sponsored. When you're an entrepreneur, you get to sponsor your own show. That makes me very special. So I'm going to sponsor my own show. That's what I've decided. My company, E4 Strength, is the sponsor, e4strength.com. We are the leading eccentric strength training equipment manufacturer in the country. We have our equipment's being used by dozens of pro and college teams, but most notably the Detroit Red Wings and the Pittsburgh Steelers are our training partners, and we're very happy to be associated with those programs. Want to learn more about it, go to e4strength.com, and there's videos and all kinds of stuff on there. So thank you for checking that out. So Lori Chapman Longfritz. She is the sister of U.S. Air Force Tech Sergeant John Chapman. She is also the author of the New York Times bestselling book, Alone at Dawn, which details the events of her brother's death in 2002 on Takur, Afghanistan, on Roberts Ridge. So if you just Google Roberts Ridge, you're going to find a lot of information. But Alone at Dawn is the book, the most truthful and factual depiction of what happened that day. And I can't wait to get into great detail with her and talk about everything there is to do with that day and the things that followed thereafter, leading up to her writing this book. So without further ado, Lori Longfritz,
Hi.
how are you?
How are you? Thank you for having me.
I'm excited. I think, and just to give everybody a little background. So we don't know each other.
No.
I am not afraid to reach out and ask for things. So everybody that is a fan of the show knows that I did an episode with Bronwyn DeMasso, the sister of Commander Job Price, the commander of SEAL Team 4, who died suspiciously in Afghanistan in 2012. Through that podcast and the subsequent investigation I've done and the copious amounts of information I've been brought in on, I learned about John Chapman. And there's some connectivity between what happened with Job and what happened with John. And for me, when I see there's no such thing as coincidence, and the connectivity isn't by happenstance. There is a direct line between what happened to Job and what happened with John 10 years prior. So that's how I sort of found out about John. And then I found out about the book Alone at Dawn. And of course, there's so many different platforms of social media. And I have a profile on LinkedIn, and I looked for hers and asked her to connect with me and sent her a message. And I just pretty much said, we're fighting the same fight. I think we need to talk. And so we did. And now we're here. So that's kind of how this whole thing started. So thank you for answering my message.
Of course. Thanks for reaching out to me.
I think what we're about to go do today is number one, bring a big shining light on your brother. That's my ultimate goal, is for people. I'm an American patriot through and through. My blood is red, white, and blue.
I appreciate that.
I am not.
And I thank you for your service.
Thank you. And I'm not a guy that is, I don't enjoy exposing wrongdoing in the military. I don't. I think it's horrible that this is happening.
It exists. Yes.
But it does. It exists. And unfortunately, my theory is this: if I put my hand on the Bible and I raised my right hand and I swore to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I expect the same level of commitment to that oath that I did. And where I've become aware is that there is a segment of the Navy SEAL population specifically that is not upholding and defending the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So for me, this is an opportunity to bring to light the heroism and the amazing life that John Chapman lived, but then also to continue to back up my assertions that I've made in prior episodes that there is a cancerous cell within the Navy SEALs. So I think it's important for people to understand the context and also to hear it from another person who has absolutely nothing to do with me. Mm-hmm. You know nothing about Joe Price. You know nothing about any of that outside of what you've been brought in on after learning what happened to John.
Right. I was just sent, Google him and look and see and read the articles about it. And I mean, even just from that, I felt there was something fishy. And he's not the only one. There's the Staff Sergeant Logan Melgar. Yep. Logan Melgar. I don't, there's a lot of stink. And I want to make it very clear to everyone that I do not believe the SEALs as a whole, every single one of them and the whole organization is rotten. I do not believe that for 1 second. It's probably a minute amount of people, but they're strong and vile. And, so I just want to make it clear when I say the SEALs, I'm talking about that specific group and not in general, but I may just say the SEALs.
And that's a great point to make. And I've said it on other shows when I'm talking about this, that my love for the military has no end. And I know yours as well, and your brothers did as well. And right. He respected the work that he was doing and the people he was doing it with. And I think it's important that just like any profession, I'm a cop. You can only imagine what it's like to be a cop in today's world with the negative press that's coming with people that are trying to paint with a broad brush saying that all police officers are corrupt murderers, which is, it's 0.001% of the population of police officers that are potentially corrupt. And I would say it's the same thing with the Navy and the Army and the Air Force and the Marines. Right. There are bad apples in every profession.
Yes.
I just happen to be involved in a personal component of this where a friend of mine died in Afghanistan and he was the commander of SEAL Team 4. And I know for a fact he didn't commit suicide. But that's what the Navy is saying, and that's what the SEALs are saying. So I need to know what is the truth, what actually happened, and I will kick whatever door in that needs to be kicked in to uncover that. And if I have to rattle some cages by having shows that are a little bit less than lauding for the Navy SEALs, then so be it. And I think for you, it's the same thing. Your brother's story and the fact that there was a less than truthful version of it that was in existence for over a decade, mm-hmm. that now has come to light thanks to some CIA drone footage that happened to come about. And had that not come about, there would still be a cloak of lies covering what actually happened.
We would never have known the truth. The truth would never, ever have come out. But that drone footage was available pretty immediately.
Right. Just nobody knew. Nobody put it out there, right?
I think they did. I mean, so long ago. I think they did, but I mean, except for that night and maybe the few hours after that, when the SEALs didn't know that there had been because it was just happenstance that this drone was flying over. The pilot was just going, flying around looking for something and saw something going on down there and said, "Hey, let me just circle and see what's going on." So at the time, immediately when it happened and immediately thereafter, the SEALs probably had no idea because, we can get onto that later, but, they came up with, their version of events. And then when it came out that there was a drone video, then, oh shit, we have to change our story now. So, and then later, much later, years later, to support the Medal of Honor, lo and behold, there's also a video from an AC-130 from way much higher up. And, we can talk about those two videos later on, but.
Well, here, let's start the show off like I start off every show. I asked one question, and normally it's the question pertaining to the guest, but today, and like I did with Job when I was interviewing Bronwyn, I'm going to ask you the one question, and the one question that I want to ask you is, who was U.S. Air Force Tech Sergeant John Chapman?
Well, first of all, he was posthumously promoted to master. So
Ooh, I did not know that.
Yes, at the Medal of Honor, well, 2 ceremonies after, he was posthumously promoted. But anyway, you know, this is something I've always said, and I will probably continue to say it. You give me 5 minutes or 5 days, and I can fill the time talking about John and my other siblings, Tammy and Kevin. But listening to Job's sister and listening to other Gold Star siblings talking about their brothers, it seems like there's this thread where she could have been talking about John, and another sister that I listened to could have been talking about John, because the qualities in John and their brothers, and there seems to be this commonality of just being a really good person, living his life for others. I mean, from the time he was a little kid, he was in tune with people. Like my mother would be having a bad day, and before he could barely talk, he would just approach her and cup her face and say, "It's okay, mommy," or "It'll be okay." You know, I mean, from the youngest age, he was just in tune with people. And we grew up in an age when, how can I say this? It wasn't encouraged by the adults for us to be inclusive of everyone. You know, if we made fun of someone with Down syndrome, the adults just looked the other way. Nobody said anything. Nobody tried to, I mean, I don't say nobody, again, I'm generalizing. But John had this way about him that he did not care who saw him talking to these people. He didn't care. He did the right thing when no one was looking, because it was the right thing to do. And I heard that from Job's sister. I heard Bronwyn. I heard it from her, and I heard it from other sisters, that's how their brothers were. It's the sense of team, like really believing there's no I in team. I have stories of John, you know, playing soccer and wanting to, you know, having a not a good relationship with the coach, and, you know, wishing that he could just stick it to the coach, but in doing that, he would have stuck it to his team, and he couldn't do that. So, I mean, there are time and time again. And I don't want to think everyone to think I'm saying he was an angel, because he was a smart ass. He was, you know, he got in trouble, but, you know, more often than not, he got away with it. But to the core, his core, where he was such a good person, and would do anything for anyone, even if you just got done shitting on him. If it was something that he felt you really needed, he would do something for you. And yeah, I could go on with stories from the childhood. And when he was an airman, a young 21-year-old airman in Aurora, Colorado, Lowry Air Force Base, which is now closed. You know, what does a 21-year-old single airman do? A good-looking guy on the weekends. Party, date, whatever. He found, I don't know how he met him. Yeah, right?
That's what I did.
I don't know how he met this little couple, June and Harold, but they lived in the mountains in Colorado. I believe Harold was the one with the oxygen, and John would spend, you know, not every weekend, but quite a lot of time up there at their house, chopping wood for them, getting them ready for the winter, things like that. That's the kind of kid he was.
I love, first of all, and I don't even know if I mentioned it to you or not, but my brother passed away when I was 18 in a car accident. He was learning disabled and had autism, but there was no autism in the 1970s and 80s, at least
right.
Not well known. Stuttered, ADHD, you name it. He had all the known similar issues with his life. And for me, when I speak of my brother, because I want my brother's name and his story and his legacy and how he looked through my eyes.
Yes.
I want people to see that. And I can see when you're telling the story how proud you are of John, and not just for what happened when he was in the military, but just his moral integrity and his character. I think, and you made the mention about Brian when explaining Job, and having known Job as a kid, it was as if you're explaining who Job was. He was a team guy. He was, you know, he was always about the team. He was always inclusive. And that's one thing I mentioned in that podcast was Job didn't care whether you're rich or poor or black or white. he was your friend. And
Yep.
and that was one of the things that drew everybody to him, is they knew that there wasn't anybody he wasn't going to judge them
Yep.
on some circumstantial shit. It was the character of the person that he cared about.
And that's how John was. I also like to say, and it's true, that if he spent 1 minute with you or 1 hour or a day or a whole lifetime, whenever you were in his presence, you felt that you were the most important person to him at that moment in time, because he treated you that way with respect and just as a person. In high school, they had a student come in from Vietnam, couldn't speak a lick of English. And he and his friends decided that they were going to take him in under their wings and be his friend. And I don't know exactly when Stripes came out, the movie Stripes.
Right.
And they had the one character was an English teacher for the
Yep.
non-English speaking. Well, they kind of took off from that, a riff off that, and started teaching how to swear in English. And here he's not in English class telling the teacher, "Shit, son of bitch," like the movie. And
Son of bitch.
so they didn't, and they didn't do that to be mean at all. They were just, he was a friend, whether you could speak English or not. He was their friend, and they would have done that to anyone else, and they weren't making fun of him. And throughout high school, they remained friends. So I don't know, that's just all inclusive.
What was the age difference between you and John?
1.5 years. And
who's the older?
I'm older.
You're the older one.
Yeah, Mom had 4 kids in 5 years. So
Wow.
I do not remember ever it not being the 4 of us.
That's cool.
It's like we were quadruplets, because I don't have any memory of not having all 4 of us together.
What was your relationship like with John growing up? Like, was it a big sister, little brother? Or was it like peers? Was it?
No, we were more like peers. I don't know if technically there's you have the older child, the youngest child, the middle child. Well, we were 2 in the middle because there were 4 of us. And so I don't know if there's technically like the older middle and the younger middle, but so sometimes we fought for that middle child status. We would verbally spar a lot, and in doing that, I won most of the time in those cases. But I think it helped him too. It kind of sharpened him a little bit, and he got me a few times too. There was always competition among all of us, or a couple of us at one point in time or another, and we had our arguments, but it was mostly good. Even if we were arguing, if someone outside attacked, it was the 4 of us together, and you're not going to win. So
did he was he like before I ask that question, how many boys and girls are there?
2 boys, 2 girls. Kevin, it's boy, girl. Kevin, Lori, John, Tammy.
Okay. So Kevin's the oldest brother.
Yes.
He's probably a year and a half older.
A year and a half older than me.
So who between Kevin and John, and I'm just curious because I don't know anything about Kevin.
Right.
So
Right.
who was the prototypical "don't you say that to my sister" brother to someone on the outside?
Oh my gosh, so that's really hard because they're 2 very different people. Kevin is quiet, but also very loyal, and John was not quiet, but very loyal also. So I think they both would be that, but it would be you'd see something different from each one of them. Kevin's would be more subtle maybe, and John would be like in your face.
Right. So John was the one, if anybody walked into the Chapman squad and started talking shit or creating problems, the one that you would see first, the first one to rise to the front would be John?
Would be John, or actually Tammy was she's quiet, but she's a little spitfire too. So, because we had a little incident, and she shocked me when she kind of stepped up and, showed her teeth. But yeah, John, of the 2 brothers, I think John would be first, but Kevin would be like right there behind him.
Right. The reason I asked that question, because it's when you look at, so growing up, I was even though I was 2.5 years younger than my brother, I was the older brother. just
Right.
by happenstance. And
Yeah.
so I had to do a lot of the older brother things for my brother, protecting him, defending him, deflecting attention off of him onto me, that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
So it sort of helped create who I am today, that protective
Protector.
gene. Yeah.
Mhm.
So I was just curious to see whether or not that protective gene was
Yeah.
something that was present at an early age with John when
Oh, for
when the
sure.
flock was attacked.
For sure. But, their dynamic wasn't the same as yours, with your brother, because, Kevin could defend himself. John didn't really take on the older brother role, but that was his role in the family, was more the first to step up as the protector. I see the blind side, and, Michael Orr was 98% protector, and I'm like, that would be John.
And the reason why I bring that up, and I talked about this in my other podcast, Third Shift Chronicles, that being a cop is a calling.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you really are a cop, like everything that you think of police officer, that's something that you were born into. It's something that your life was built towards achieving that position as a job. And I think the military is the same way, and even more so, like a 10x factor if you go into special operations.
Right.
The ones that are wired, you're just wired differently.
Oh, yeah.
Both
there are some
physically,
badass
mentally.
guys who tried to become a combat controller, and they failed because they just didn't have whatever that X factor is.
That's a great segue. So let's talk about when John's in high school,
Mm-hmm.
and you obviously played soccer, you were saying, and
Diver, baseball, yeah.
What was the other one? Diver?
Diver.
For the swim team?
Yes.
So, and that's, and I'm going to go off and on tangents here every once in a while, but
Sure.
Like my son, we talked about a little bit before the show. My son wants to go special operations. He wants to be, initially wanted to be a SEAL, but with all the stuff that he's finding out about the SEALs, he's taken a hard right to the Army, which is the right side, which I'm glad. But
I vote for Air Force.
and I would have a problem with the Air Force whatsoever, because that was actually, so Job, and I don't know if you heard that in the podcast, but when we graduated, Job and I were the only two people in our class that had appointments to military academies. I had United States Coast Guard Academy, and he went to the Air Force Academy, and then transferred his commission from the Air Force to the Navy when he graduated. So I have no problem with the Air Force whatsoever. I think that would be a great avenue, but he hasn't yet. I don't think he sees the glamour of the Air Force combat controller, because it is such an unknown part of the special operations community. And I'm hoping that after today, people are like, oh shit, those boys are badass. That's what I want to happen. So what I see is that there's this, my son has wanted to do this since he was 8. That's been in his mindset. He's been looking at, as long as there's been YouTube videos, he's been watching them on special operations. Wow. Did John always know that was what he was going to go do?
He and his friends used to play Army, and I guess back then it was Green Berets.
Nobody ever played Navy. Let's just start there.
Yeah, nobody ever did. No. And and his best friend at his eulogy said, "Hey, if we had heard of Air Force combat control, I'm sure we would have wanted to be those instead." But so they were Green Berets. But that was their kid minds just playing like cowboys and Indians and Army. I don't think out of high school he tried college for a year, or I think it was a year. I think it was 2 semesters. He and a good friend of his did everything they could to try to find new ways to lower their GPAs the first year. So David decided, hey, I need to buckle down and do this right starting, my sophomore year. And John decided, this isn't for me. I can't sit in a classroom. I need to be doing. So the year after that, he became a mechanic. He worked for a local guy in Windsor Locks and learned all kinds of mechanics. And he already knew a lot anyway, but he learned how to, make an accident look like it was a brand new car,
Right.
And then after a year, he was like, and he had thought about, he had talked to David about the Air Force. So it was in his mind in high school and in college. like maybe I should just go to the Air Force. He always wanted to travel the world. He always liked to challenge himself. And so he thought about it, but never really looked into it until after that year of being a mechanic and decided this isn't for me either. I need to get out of this town. I need to get out there in the world and find out who I really am. And so he joined the Air Force, and then he told my parents, asked them, what do you think? And they said, well, that's a good idea. And he said, good, because I'm going, in September. And my mom said to him, well, promise me that you'll at least try something safe. That was her first thought. Please try something safe. So he promised her, and he always keeps his promises. So he gave it 3 years. But in basic, he heard about combat control, and he kept that in his head as he was sitting behind a desk and hating every second of it. He put in his time, and as soon as he fulfilled his promise to Mom, he decided to submit to cross-train into combat control.
What was the original job he enlisted as?
Communications of some sort. I don't know I can't think of the actual title.
It wasn't pilot, mechanic.
Oh, no.
More in the...
No, he was sitting behind a desk.
Side. Yeah.
Yeah. He said, I did not join the Air Force to sit behind a fucking desk. So, sorry, Mom. But, yeah.
I'll apologize now, Mom. I'm going to say fuck probably 40 times. I'm going to say sorry now.
But, I'm not supposed to say that. But anyway, and so, yeah, he just said, I gave it a try. I fulfilled my promise to Mom. And now I'm going to do what I want to do, challenge myself, see if I can make it. Because combat controllers make 0.01% of the Air Force.
Well, let's talk about that then. Let's talk about because everybody knows Special Forces, Army Rangers,
Green Berets,
SEALs. Yeah, so everybody, they're the glory special
even
operations.
Pararescue. People have heard of Pararescue.
Yep,
for Air
one
Force.
of my best friends was Pararescue.
Right.
And they're all phenomenal.
Yes.
Phenomenal, amazing warriors, every one of them.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like the redheaded stepchild, right? That's the Air Force combat controller.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about, because you do detail a lot of that in the book as well, Alone at Dawn. And I think it's important for people to understand not only John's sacrifice, but what it took to get to the point where he was landing in that helicopter on Roberts Ridge. So there is a story behind that got him to be where he is, being attached to a SEAL unit. So let's talk about what it took. What is a combat controller? What does a combat controller do? And what is the training like to become a combat controller?
I guess in layman's terms, if you will, I mean, in the very basic description is they're air traffic controllers, but there's so much more than that. They control the entire battlefield in the air. Right. They can control an airport. They have airplanes stacked in 2,000 feet increments, and they have to know every aircraft, what armaments they have. They have to know the distance that you need to be for the impact of everything that they just have to know all of it, all the bombs, all the aircraft, what they carry, how long it takes to get for the bomb to hit the ground, everything. And they have to be able to do this. And I mean, at one point in time, a good friend of ours he was going after bin Laden in Tora Bora, and he had them stacked. Like, I don't even know how many aircraft he had, and all different kinds. And so basically they do that. They also are the first in to set up airports or air landing strips where there is none, or take over ones that are there, or bring up ones that have been damaged. Combat controllers also have a what do you call it? Peacetime segment or piece to them also. Like Haiti, when Haiti had the earthquake, a handful of combat controllers were sent there, and they had a folding desk and radios, and they were able to bring up the airport. The president of Haiti gave them the the permission to, you do what you need to do to get us up and running. And it was combat controllers who did that. They're the ones who were responded to Katrina. So it's not just in war. These guys have a mission also in peacetime. They're the first there. Their motto is first there.
Right.
And they're the first there, and they're usually the last out. And having known a lot of combat controllers, and then hearing Delta Force people who
don't worry about the dog.
Our badasses. I'm like, okay, I've got one barking out there, and this she's usually quiet, but anyway. Then we have, they're badasses on their own, but I mean, we have a Delta Force commander saying, anyone who goes into battle and doesn't want a combat controller with them is stupid, because he understands the value that they bring to any group that they are in. And these guys are trained. They do not only do they do their own training, they train with the SEALs, they train with Delta, they train with everybody so that they can integrate. They could change day to day, hour to hour. They may be in a SEAL team group one time, and an hour later they're with Army Rangers. So they have to be able to integrate with everyone and know everyone's job.
And the physical requirements. So, people don't understand the value that being not just intelligent and good at your technical job,
right,
but the physical requirements that you were saying with the integration with all the other units. These guys are all the 0.101% physically in all of the military. And you look at, people think Air Force, they think Chair Force. It's like, and listen, I was on an Air Force base where I didn't have to take my tray back up when I had someone came and cleared that off. So I get why it's called that, but they're the anomaly.
Right.
They're the chameleon.
Yes. And they always have the heaviest rucks because they have all the radios and the batteries and the backups and so they were, at least back then, maybe, I'm sure now things are getting smaller and more high tech, but it was easily, combat controller's ruck was easily 50 or 70 pounds heavier than everyone else's. And they had to, climb to God knows where to get reception and set up all their antennas and, start calling in airstrikes.
So what year did John become a combat controller? Because I'm trying to create some context on how long he was doing it before 2007.
1990 he graduated.
From controller school?
Yep. He bloused his pants and donned the red beret in July of 1990.
All right. So there was a 12-year period where your brother was working and excelling and learning and becoming the very best at combat controller type stuff, right? Right.
And when Desert Storm happened, obviously they all want to go. They all want to, but as it would happen, before it all happened, John and I don't know if they were married yet. When was Desert Storm? 91?
1991, yeah. December is when the airstrike started, and then
okay, so they were. It was his girlfriend then. They went to visit my dad in Michigan. He was horseback riding one of their horses, and the horse started rearing up. I think he got bitten by a fly or something. It started rearing up, and John, calm as could be, figured he could. I can handle this. So he waited for the horse's butt to be down, and then slid off the back. But then the horse was coming back up and threw him. He felt, a little sore, but then that night, in the middle of the night, he woke up Valerie, who's a nurse, at the time. And he said, there's something wrong. And she said, we need to get you to the hospital right now. And they were out in the middle of nowhere. Of course, my father went the wrong way and, wasted a half an hour trying to get to the hospital. Got to the hospital, and the doctor was in shock that John was still alive because his spleen had ruptured.
Ooh.
And so because of that, they did not remove the spleen, but that put him on injured, whatever you call it in the military, injured reserve if you're a football player. So he missed out on going. So he never had that chance to really test his mettle and see, if all this training that he's been going through, would serve him well. So he
Well,
missed all
having
that.
been there, I can tell you it was a very short war. So
Yeah.
he wouldn't have had a whole lot of time to get his feet wet because it ended rather quickly.
Yeah. But so after that, and I don't know the exact time frame, but they got married and they had Madison, and then they had Brianna in 98. And back in that time frame, nothing was happening. Like you said, there were all these years where nothing was going on, in the world militarily. And so he started thinking, forward up to retirement. He wanted to put in his 30 or his 20, but he thought, I'm a combat controller and I've got all these, badass skill sets. And the only thing I could do outside of military is Secret Service, CIA, that kind of thing. And he's like, and I don't want to do that. I have 2 little girls, they kind of, the shift switched, or the focus shifted to, family more so. And so he still remained he was in the 24th Special Tactics Unit at Pope in North Carolina. But he transferred over to, they call the survey team. So he wasn't, when 9/11 happened, he wasn't all geared up and fully functional as a combat controller, because he had done survey for, I think, 2.5 years before 9/11 happened, which is still a very dangerous job, but he wasn't up on all of the, like prime for combat control. But when 9/11 happened, he basically said, put me in, coach. I have to go, and so he did everything humanly possible to get himself back into top shape and back into, all of the radio things. And I don't even know where I was going with that, but
I think it's important for people to understand, the realities, and it's no different than being a cop. Being a cop's 90% boredom, 10% adrenaline, right?
Sure.
90% of the time you're driving around or checking business.
Plus training.
Right. But it's not the super exciting stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you're in a non-combat environment, even if he had been up to speed on all the training, and it's still not the same as the real thing. And
Sure.
And I think once he, and just like anyone else, on 9/11, I became an air marshal after 9/11 because I wanted to get back in the game. And
right.
So I get that. I get that burning desire and patriotism that says, I'm not going to let them guys go by themselves. I'm coming with you. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that is a testament to, because people don't understand, when you got kids, it changes everything.
Yeah.
Like you're in this conflicted moment in life where you're like, do I do this or don't I do this? And if I don't do this, can I live with myself? But if I do do this and something happens, can they live with the choice that I made?
Right.
I'm sure he was in that same situation.
Oh, I'm sure. And I keep referencing different movies. There's Field of Dreams.
Mm-hmm.
When the Archie, is his name Archie? The doctor, when he steps off the field and you see this cleat become a doctor's shoe or whatever. That's how John was. That's how I envisioned John being. He'd drop his duffel bag outside the door or just inside the door when he got home. And as soon as he walked in, he was no longer a warrior. He was dad. And, he'd get on the floor and play Barbies with the girls and give them baths and throw them around. And it was like 2 separate people. He could compartmentalize for the most part. And when it came time to, when 9/11 happened, he was very conflicted because those girls were his world at that point in time. He had been in almost he did TDYs, but, more of a 9-to-5 type of job in survey, I think. And I know he talked to Valerie about it, and it was something that he felt he had to do. I don't think he could have lived with himself if he didn't go. And I can tell you, he didn't have to go. When he was accepted back and said, okay, well, you need to get trained up, they sent him to Virginia Beach to work with this particular SEAL team. And he was there for several months, because I know my mom and my daughter and I went and visited him in November of '01. And so he was training with them, and then he was told, well, they're going, but you don't have to go. We can send another combat controller. And he said, I've been training with these guys for months now. They know how I work. They know me. They trust me. I have to go. To be, why would I send them with someone else? And so he went. He didn't have to go.
When did they deploy? Do you remember?
Well, here's the thing, too. He was supposed to deploy in January of '02. Was it the beginning of the beginning of January. But my grandmother had passed away in Michigan. And so before they deployed, they found out about it. He's like, I really have to go and be there so they sent someone else to the beach. They weren't deployed yet. So this other person went to the beach, and John went and, went to the funeral in Michigan and saw all the relatives, and came back. Well, at that point in time, you're not going to say, okay, friend, now you're out and I'm back in again. It's his assignment. Well, I can't remember if it happened after they deployed. I think it was right after they deployed. The other guy's mother-in-law passed away. So he had to come back, and John replaced him. So that's how John got back on the team, that he didn't have to go with in the first place. And there were other times, even that day that he died, that he didn't have to go. And he said, that's my team. I'm part of the team, and I'm going. So there were several times where he could have opted out. He was given a pass. He was handed it, and he said, no, I'm going. So
now, in retrospect, and I always look at, I wrote a book about my life and with my brother. So you get to go back and relive it again, and write the story of your life. And you get to see how, while at the moment may seem insignificant, but in the grand scheme of things, it was very significant. When coming home to your grandmother's funeral, was that the last time you saw John?
I couldn't even make the funeral because of I had 2 jobs and a daughter, and long story, but I couldn't go. I was the only, Tammy went, Kevin went, my dad was there. All these relatives who never would have seen him otherwise, got to see him. The last time I saw him was when Mom and Rachel and I went to see him at the beach.
And how
November.
Long? November?
It was Veterans Day weekend, because it was a long weekend.
It's just, for me, those things are like, it was almost everyone's chance to be with John.
Right.
At the funeral.
Well, there were weird things that should not have, and actually I was wrong. I'm wrong. I did see him for Christmas, because we all met at my grandmother's house in New Jersey. So the last time I saw him was Christmas of '01. But there were things that happened. My sister should never have been able to see him, but it just so happened. And she never, ever traveled for work. But she was sent to North Carolina, and she ended up, she and John were crossing paths in Raleigh Airport, and got to spend a couple hours together. And, my grandmother wouldn't have seen him, but they said, yeah, let's just go meet there for Christmas and see you guys. So there were certain things that people who never should have seen him, who got to see him before he left.
And that's God. I don't care what anybody says.
I believe it 100%. 100%.
And I think, me and my brother and my parents went away on vacation the week before he died. And my parents stayed an extra week in Delaware at the beach. And me and my brother came home because we had jobs and whatnot. And so I look at that moment in time where we were together as a family as the last chance we had. And there was a picture taken 3 days before he died of all of us together. And so those are things, that's God saying, you don't know this yet, but these moments are going to be the moments that you're going to treasure for the rest of your life.
I knew. Our family did a Christmas exchange where you draw people's names. And that Christmas, I drew John's name. And he and Valerie had just bought a Silverado pickup truck, and he loved Harleys. So I bought him a Harley hitch cover. And I normally liked Christmas. I'd wrap presents and be all, get it all pretty. And I remember as I was wrapping that gift, I was bawling. And I had this awful, awful feeling that he was never going to be able to enjoy that gift. And I think that was the first, actually I felt it even in back in November when we saw him at the beach. I gave him a big hug, and being big sister, I didn't want to say things like, "Oh, don't go, I have this bad feeling," but I felt it, and I hugged him and didn't want to let him go, but I wouldn't say it to him. All I said to him was, "Watch your back."
I'm going to ask you a very weird question,
Mm-hmm.
because this happened to me. On the day that John died, did anything specific happen in your life that gave you like the chills? Was there
Not that I recall. At that point in time, I was working ungodly hours. I had 2 jobs, and I hadn't seen the news. I didn't know there had been an accident or an incident. And for me, my motto back then was just keep me moving. As long as I'm moving, I'm okay. I'll be awake. So nothing stands out, but I was also a zombie most of the time anyway, because I was always tired. But nothing like that stands out for me.
Was there, when you found out the day, well, let's not get to there yet. What was the date of that mission, of John's final mission?
The date that he died was
Yeah.
March 4th, 2002. Well, it's kind of started March 3rd.
Right.
Yeah.
So what was your day like the day that you found out that he died? And how long after the mission did you find out?
I didn't find out until, I don't know what the time difference is either from Afghanistan to, Windsor Locks, Connecticut, but
it's about 10 hours difference. They're 10 hours ahead.
From what I understand, obviously they had to notify Valerie first, and then my parents, and then I found out from my mom's husband at the time, and it was like 10:30 at night, and I was in bed by, because I had the 2 jobs. I had to get up at 2:00 in the morning to get to my first job. So I was dead asleep when he called me. So the day before, that prior day, everything just went the way it normally did.
So when you got that phone call, when the phone, let me ask you this, when the phone rang and you heard it was your mom's husband at the time, what was your initial reaction to why he would be calling?
I thought something happened with my mother because I could hear her screaming in the background. And all I could say was, what is wrong with, what did you do to her? And he's never, I have to say, never, not a violent person, never, never laid a hand on her. But I know I'm sound asleep, and I would fall asleep immediately back then. So I was in a deep sleep by then, and couldn't even fathom why he would be calling me, because he never called me, first of all, and then second of all, the time. And he didn't know how to handle it, with my mother screaming in the background, and all he kept saying was, "Get over here right now." And I'm like, "What's going on? What did you do to my mom? What's wrong with her?" And he kept saying, "Just get over here." And he finally just said, "It's your brother." And I just said, "Fuck," and hung up the phone, had to get my daughter up and drive 5 minutes over to mom's house.
And if you don't mind, and I know these are tough discussions, when you walked in the door, what was your first emotional reaction when you saw your mom?
I almost didn't have a chance for a first emotion, because when I walked in the door, she collapsed in my arms. She was like just waiting. And even at that point, I mean, I kind of knew, because when I pulled up, the dark car was pulling away. And so I just knew, but it hadn't been verbalized at that point in time until my mother hugged me, and then she kind of stepped back and said, "We lost Johnny." And It was disbelief. I'm like, just the way John lived his life and the things that he got away with, like, or survived in his childhood, you know, you almost think of him as indestructible, you know, like, this isn't true. This can't be true, you know. Um, and that's where you find out that he was just a normal human being who could succumb. So, and then we found out later that there was more to it than that, but that's all we knew at the time.
And if you don't mind me asking, what was it that they told your mom happened to John?
Initially, and for I think quite a while afterwards, I can't put a time frame on it, but it was, you know, they you know, first of all, when they tried to land, then Neil Roberts, the SEAL, fell out and they left, and then they had to come back to try to find him. And that's when they came back. All we heard was that they landed, they took fire. The team leader went out first. John, as the combat controller, should have been the last one out, but everything was put together, you know, ad hoc, just this is how it is. We have to go find Neil. So John happened to be right behind the team leader. And when he fell, John just stepped over him and went straight for the first gun nest that was shooting at them and took out the two guys in there, and then headed for the other one.
Is that what they said then? Or is that, yeah.
Well, no, actually, sorry. What they said then was he went to the first bunker, killed those guys, and he was shot and killed immediately, right then and there. And, you know, gradually we started learning things, you know, well, his body wasn't found there. So, you know, there were different things that, you know, I'm sure the Navy probably would have liked our family to be stupid. And we did accept their story initially. But then we just started hearing things, and we knew there was something more to it. And, you know, my mom had asked his commander, did John die instantly? And he said yes. And we all knew.
The Air Force commander?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, and technically he did die instantly when that last bullet hit him, but what we wanted to know
later.
exactly, over an hour later, yes.
Right.
But in that, what we wanted to know, you know, wasn't answered. You know, but at the time we thought he was, you know, yes, this is the truth. And yeah, we just had to learn gradually different things.
So we're gonna go into a little bit of a controversial direction.
Okay.
For lack of a better term. So 2002, March 4th, 2002, your brother, according to your family's knowledge and what the Navy told your family,
so the Air Force told us, yeah.
The Air Force told you guys he died instantaneously, pretty much after moving into that first bunker, and got killed and died there.
Yes.
So from that day on, when did this suspicion become something that you believed to be different? And what was the time period between the date that you found out he died and when you decided that's bullshit, something else happened and I'm going to find out? What was that period of time?
It was immediate.
Sort of under the belief that it is what they said it was.
See, here's the thing. It was immediate. I'm speaking mostly from my perspective and my mother's, because we've talked a lot about this. But I believe all of us, even my dad, I think we knew right from the beginning that there was something more, but we had no other information. So we accepted it as the truth. And that's the way it happened. Since then, there were a couple of books written, and, you know, they kind of started saying, you know, well, wait a minute, his body was at this other bunker. It wasn't at this bunker. And, you know, there were different things that I learned that when the Navy SEAL, when Neil fell, he was killed, they say, within, because I had heard about the video. We weren't allowed to see it. It was classified, I think, back then. They said that Neil was killed within 20 to 30 minutes of him falling out. And So they had the Taliban, Al Qaeda, they had all kinds of time with Neil and his body, so of course they're taking, things out of his ruck. I didn't even know if they had a ruck because they were stripped down as light as possible because they thought they weren't going to be there for long. I guess they weren't. Anyway, they did things to his body because they had time. And then we find out when John was killed, or when we found out about John, I start hearing, but John's body wasn't mutilated, and he wasn't. And as a matter of fact, the commander from the QRF that was sent in later thought he had guilt because he thought they had killed John. So to me, I'm like, okay, well, if he thought John was killed, then Rigger couldn't have set in yet, which means he didn't die an hour before. And, it was just little things that I suppose we weren't supposed to pick up on, or we weren't supposed to question because, the Air Force told us what the Navy told them, and it's gospel. We just kind of went along with it for years, several years. In 2006, I think it was, they named a ship after John. And Slab, the team leader, was...
we're going to say his name. What's his name?
Britt Slavinsky.
Okay.
He that tastes like vinegar when I say it.
Same here.
It looked like he was kind of forced to be at that ceremony.
At the ship?
The ship dedication.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
In this one, I think it was 2006. Even at that point in time, I saw him and I went up to him, gave him a hug, like, how you doing? I hope you're doing okay, and my dad took him into a private office. And to this day, my father passed away 2 years after John did. So nobody really knows unless somebody knows it isn't saying, but Dad wanted to ask him something. So they went in and talked for very briefly and then came back out. So I don't know what Dad asked him, but we accepted him then. And because we didn't really have the solid proof of anything else, and I always said, I can't blame him for what happened on the mountain. I wasn't there. I've never been shot at. I've never been in thigh-deep snow in the dark, surrounded by enemies. So who am I to say you're wrong? Until I found out, when we started writing the book, and Dan, my co-author, who is a retired combat controller, started unearthing. There were things in other books, Not a Good Day to Die. There's a lot in there, I guess, about things that we didn't know initially. But
when did that book come out?
Goodness.
I'm just trying to create a timeline so people can sort of see how things unfolded.
Well, the first one that came out was called Robert's Ridge by Malcolm McPherson. I call it trash. It was like it came out really fast after John was maybe
taking advantage of the momentum of the moment. Yeah. And
from what I understand, and I don't have proof of this, from what I understand, he was actually approached by the SEALs to write this book. I don't know if that's true. So I'm just saying, since I don't have proof of it, I shouldn't say it, but
I'll say it.
Okay.
Attribute it to me.
It was trash. He came to my mom's house and interviewed us and told us he was writing this, and it was nothing like he claimed he was going to be. And then I want to say.
And that was how long? Was that within a year or two after?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. It was very, very quick. And then I want to say Not a Good Day to Die was Sean Naylor. Was at least, I want to say like 5 years later. At least. It was around 4, 5, 6 years later, I think. And that had way more information in there that I'm sure the SEALs didn't like. And honestly, I never read the book. It was something I couldn't do. After John was killed, I couldn't watch military movies. I couldn't read military books. But I did read certain parts that my mom said, you need to read this. And it just started confirming how we thought all along. Put it this way, when we were at the ship dedication ceremony, now, my husband was John's first sergeant. I did not know Kenny until after John died. And we ended up getting married. Well, we were married, and the general that was in charge back then, Air Force, I don't know what his title was. Anyway, Kenny approached him and said, "Hi, sir, I'm Kenny Longfritz. I was John Chapman's first sergeant, and now I'm married to his sister." He up front told the guy who he was and said, "Do you think there's any way for the Air Force to take a look again at John's actions and at the Air Force Cross?" Because he was awarded the Air Force Cross in January of 2003. And this was, I think, 2006, maybe 2005. And the general's response to Kenny was, "The Chapman family has been really easy to work with. Let's not ruffle any feathers or create any waves." I mean, that alone is like, ding, 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 there's something going on here. And he knew Kenny was my husband, and he said it anyway. So, yeah, Kenny and I had tried for years to try to get it upgraded.
So, the books come out, the 2 books come out. You start to get validation, at least validating that your suspicions are heading in the right direction.
Mm-hmm.
Britt Slabinski, who I will go in a little bit of a dissertation about. Britt Slabinski also received the Medal of Honor for what happened at Roberts Ridge. He was a Navy SEAL, is a Navy SEAL, and he is connected in some way to what happened with Job. And I'm not saying directly, but I'm saying that indirectly, Britt Slabinski has knowledge about what happened to Job Price. And the reason why we're talking today is because of that connectivity. I am without a doubt certain that there is the reason why what happened to John was not truthfully shared is the same reason behind why what happened to Job has not been truthfully shared. The difference between what happened to John and what happened to Job is that there's no drone footage or surveillance footage. All evidence has been destroyed. We don't have the luxury, and I don't say that whimsically. I'm just saying having some video evidence that shows exactly what your brother did that day to refute what was said for a decade plus after John died. So my connection to this and where I saw parallels was with Britt Slabinski. And now I'm going to ask you about Tim Szymanski. And
I'm wondering if, now that you're bringing Tim into this, I'm wondering if, at least as far as Slab is concerned, if the incident with John was not the beginning of it.
I would, and it's like you're reading my brain. If you look at, so I do as a cop, I look at everything and I go, what are the anomalies? What are the red flags? What are the things that stand out? And if you look at, when did the Navy SEALs stop being the silent warriors and become the brand, the Navy SEALs, which has books and movies and training companies and government contracts and history of drug abuse and drug smuggling, money laundering, things like that. All these things that are now, that have been out for a decade plus about the Navy SEALs. When did all that start? And I would argue that it started the day that your brother heroically saved 23 people's lives, but never got the credit for it until 2018. And that had to be because there was no conflict of note prior to 2002 or 9/11, we'll call it. 9/11 was the jump off point. And when it became a known mission, a directional focus of the military to destroy Al Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. And then in in turn also take out Saddam Hussein. So there was this whole focus shift towards they're the evil bad guys, we're the superhero good guys, and we need to have
do no wrong.
Five and create this lure of legendary status about.
Mm-hmm.
And that was when, and it was like, remember Happy Days when Fonzie jumped the shark?
Yeah.
That's when Happy Days became stupid. That's when the Navy SEALs jumped the shark. And I would argue that once you have one lie, and I've seen this in criminals for the last 27 years, once you start with a lie and you stick with that lie, you become the lie.
That lie, yep.
And I think that's what happened here. People are going to argue and say, no, I'm wrong. And quite frankly, I don't give a fuck what you think. I know what I've seen. And there's people
well, there'll be people who will, paint me as the angry, bitter sister. And, the truth doesn't lie. I mean, the proof is there. So you can call me whatever the heck you want. I don't give a shit. You're not, I don't care. The facts are there. The video is there. So, go ahead. Label what you wish.
Tim Szymanski. When did you first meet Tim Szymanski? Who, by the way, is the number 2 guy in Naval Special Warfare in charge of all the SEALs.
No. As far as I know, I've never met him. I don't know if he might have been at the ship dedication ceremony. But I know there were a few, a handful, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 Navy brass there. So he could have been one of them. I don't know. The only one I knew was Slav.
Now, Tim's name is associated with the mission on what level? What was Tim's responsibility for?
He was the ops officer in Bagram for the SEAL teams that were over there at the time.
And was Tim responsible for the tasking of that mission and the planning of that mission? What was his role in that?
He
based on the information you've gathered for the book.
Right. The SEAL Team 6 commander who was over there was Trebone. No, Kiernan, Joe Kiernan. And he and Szymanski, the whole thing was just a clusterfuck.
I love that. Thank you.
I need to back up just a little bit.
Please do.
That mission. There's another book called The Mission, The Men and Me by Pete Blaber. He was a Delta Force commander on the ground weeks prior to this. He and his people, that included some combat controllers, were boots on the ground, doing their in-person intel. Stay away from this area. It's hot. This is a good person to talk to and trust. I mean, for weeks, they tried different infill techniques and just to see what would work best in high altitudes with snow. What vehicles, they tried donkeys, they tried everything. So they had direct and up-to-date knowledge of that whole area. When the SEALs came in, they wanted to take over and kind of, push him out. And he's like, he had four very small teams, 3 to 4 guys, 4 guys in each team. And they were wreaking havoc. They were making shit, blow up. And the Navy came in and said, "Oh shit, we're missing out. We're gonna miss out on the big stuff." And so they wanted Pete to back off and let this other SEAL take over. And Pete pushed back, but he was like lower on the ranking thing, so he put it off as long as he could because he got the word from Brigadier General Trebone, who I guess is a Air Force pilot. Like, he shouldn't have known that this was the stupidest way to infiltrate ever. But I kind of feel like Trebone was almost just he was used for validation. Like, nope, these guys are going to take over. So the SEALs take over and they want to hear nothing about all of the intel that these guys have been collecting for weeks. nope, we got it. We're good. We don't need you. And so they all kind of had, it was offered, it was given to a different SEAL team. And that SEAL team leader said, fuck no, I'm not doing that. We're not doing it. And that was shut down immediately because the SEAL team leader said, no, I'm not doing that.
You know which
And
SEAL team that was?
It was, well, I don't know the SEAL team. I know they were Mako 2-1 back
Okay.
then. I don't know. And the leader was Goody. No, 3-1, Mako 3-1. And he was the SEAL team leader's nickname is Goody. I don't know his real name. And if I did, I probably wouldn't say it anyway. But of course he's probably retired by now. But he said, no, I'm not doing it. And then
when you did your research, did you find out why he said no?
This was research done by Dan.
Mm-hmm.
Dan found out so much that there's no way anyone would have told me. As John's sister, as a civilian, as, you know, they would never have told me any of this stuff. So Dan's the one who found out. And I think he just, you know, I'm just assuming here, but I think he saw how stupid it was. Like, yeah, we're not doing that.
Very reckless.
Yeah. And so they turned to Slab and Szymanski, and Slab didn't say no. Sure, why not? And maybe it would have worked because initially they were going to be let off at the bottom and work their way up, but through helicopter problems and different things like that, the mission was pushed hours, and they lost the surprise of night, deep dark night, and then they brilliantly decided to deposit them on top of the mountain instead to make up for the time lost.
Do you remember what time in the morning that was?
It was still dark. John died around
5 something in the morning, right?
Yeah, so maybe around 2 or 3,
okay,
something like that. Yeah, because there was time.
The Navy SEALs never deployed under the cloak of dusk or dawn. It was always the darkest part of the night you could possibly be in. They used night vision, They did everything to their advantage for a fictitious infill. So that's the MO of the Navy SEALs. And all of a sudden you started to see, and if you do your history check of every botched Navy SEAL mission in the last 19, 20 years, you'll see this trend of early morning raids that were done under the cloak of dawn.
Not dark.
But not dark. And there was this shift. And Tim Szymanski is attached to all of these botched, not all. I don't know if it's all. A lot of these botched missions. And Slabinski is his number one guy.
I want to say, and I could be wrong about this too, but I feel, and I've heard from someone else who I trust knows that I think initially Slab, I don't know if he started off bad, quote unquote, but I think that Szymanski covered his ass and then owned him.
That's how I've been told that it works. And listen, I'm going to say it now because it's getting to this point. I've seen enough connectivity between incidents to know that this rogue cell, this cancerous cell within the Navy SEALs, I don't know how many there are. It could be 10 people, could be 100. I don't know. But I can tell you it's not large. But it's influential because it's Tim Szymanski, who is the number 2 guy, was the head of Naval Special Warfare. Now he's the number 2 guy under Admiral Green. And I'm predicting that Admiral Green, who is trying to make changes within the Navy SEALs, is going to be run out of town. And Szymanski is going to be re-elevated back to the number 1 guy. That's my opinion, and I may be completely wrong, but that's what I think is happening. But there's some strong influential oversight and direction and misdirection at times being done by Tim Szymanski within the Navy SEALs. And that there isn't, I've been read in on enough major incidents and read enough statements and seen the intelligence, and now hearing from somebody who has no connectivity to me, no connection to Job, who is living it herself for the last 17, 18 years, is now uncovering the same type of corruption within the SEALs. And that's why I want to put it out there from my mouth, because I know what my instinct says and what my investigative ability says, that if there is smoke, there's fire. And my goal is to uncover that fire. So I will come back now to the day that the mission was planned and Slab said yes. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about what was uncovered by Dan and you on that mission itself and what actually happened the day that John gave his life for his country.
Starting
with the Neil Roberts, well, the plan to where they were going to infill, what happened to Neil Roberts, which is why it's called Roberts Ridge, and then everything that happened thereafter.
Well, again, ignoring what Blaber said, that mountain is hot. It has people up. We'll be fine. You know, we're SEALs. We'll be fine. And John, being the team, he's gonna go. He's gonna do what they need and follow his team leader. And I have to tell you, before I say this, when I told you my sister was able to see John at the Raleigh airport, and it was obviously before he deployed, and so her conversation with my mom may have happened right after she saw him, like before he died, and so it might not have had, as you said, it might not have had any significance at that point in time. But my mother remembers her telling my mom that John told her before he left, "I will do anything to protect my team." And that Tammy says she doesn't remember saying that, but Mom remembers it because it was very poignant to her. Like, I think she had a feeling also. And so now fast forward, whatever Slab was going to do, John was going to do, to, be the team player that he always was. So they, after finally getting off the ground, and they were initially, they wanted to land at the bottom and work their way up and surprise everybody or whatever. It didn't end up being that way. So they were going to land directly onto the mountain. As they were landing, one of the pilots saw movement. And as soon as he said, "Hey, 10 o'clock," or whatever it was, 2 o'clock, they were hit by an RPG. The back, it was a Chinook helicopter, so the back was already lowered. I think they were about 10 to 20 feet off the ground when they got hit. And I want to say they got hit by 2, but it could have been 1. I'm not sure. They had to veer off to make to get away. And at the point in time, because the back was open and not exactly sure how it happened, we were told there was diesel fuel or something on the floor, whatever, grease. Neil Roberts was not tethered in. And so he slipped. One of the rear guys tried to catch him. He held him for a split second, but this is a big guy with a big ruck or just a heavy guy, and ended up losing him to the darkness below. And at that point in time, the pilot didn't know that they had lost someone. So he went 6 or 7 kilometers away, did a controlled crash landing. John immediately set up perimeter, called in for protection, air protection. They had another helicopter come in to get them. And at this point in time, they're looking up at a mountain saying, "He's right there. We have to go get him." And the pilot's like, "That's not Takur Ghar. Takur Ghar's over there." And they were like, "Oh, shit." So they tried to leave John behind because the pilot said, "Hey, you can leave me here with my guys, but you damn well better leave me someone to protect us." So Slab said, "Not leaving any of my SEALs, so you can take Chapman." And that's when John, John's, he didn't have to go. He could have stayed with the pilots. So instead, John said, "No freaking way. I am part of this team and I'm going too. He's my teammate too." So it ended up, they were all going to go in this good helicopter. And that
pilots included.
Yeah, everybody. And then that pilot of the new helicopter said, "Fuck, no, no, we're not doing this. We're going back to Bagram, and we're going to, or Gardez, and we're going to do this right. They get back to Gardez, and, they're having trouble with this helicopter and that helicopter. There was a bunch of more delays, and they finally get it all worked out, and they brought in the helicopter that had a team on it. And Slab said, "You're off. We're going to keep the helicopter crew from that helicopter, but we're getting on it." And so John said, "Well, I'm coming too," So he went, and and they tried to land in the same spot, and as soon as they got there, they took fire. They were hit with RPGs. They were getting hit with there were three sides, because there was a sheer off the mountain on one side, and then as I said, Slab got off first. John stepped over him, went after the first gun nest, took out those two guys, and they were taking fire from another gun nest farther up the hill. And by the time Slab was reaching John at the first one, he was already heading to the second one. So and this was new thigh deep snow. So John's plowing through it at 10,000 feet plus. And, and Slab was following behind him in his path. And then John took on the second gun nest. And as that happened, the four other teammates they split off in twos to flank, I don't know what the terminology is, but to do their thing. And Slab was trying to stay with John. And there's this tree, they call it the bonsai tree, that was right near the bunker. And that's basically where most of it happened, is in that bunker. And when I say bunker, it's nothing like I expected. It's like a ditch, and it's not like a cement bunker or anything. But they took on fire, and John was hit at some point in time. He was hit and he went down. And this is where it kind of gets, even from the beginning, I thought, I don't know if that really makes too much sense, but Slab said that John's weapon was up over his chest, and that he had the infrared pointer, and he could see the infrared pointer moving like as he was breathing. And then he had to turn and deal with fighting, shooting or something. And that when he turned back and looked at him again, it wasn't moving anymore. So he said he was dead. So the other four they weren't even near them, that close. So when they all regrouped, they said, "Where's Chappie?" And he just said he's dead. They just, they have to accept that as truth. Well, that's not what happened, obviously. They decided to, and in the process, I believe three of the five guys that were still there were injured, and one of them really badly, I guess. So Slab made the determination to go off the side of the mountain, or at least head that way and see what they could do. And that's what they ended up doing. They kind of slid down, but they weren't that far away. I think it was ultimately like a half to a full football field down. And at some point in there, Slab called for QRF, called for airstrikes. He's like, "There's a bonsai tree, hit the bonsai tree." And then at some point, maybe 15 minutes after that, John came to, probably going, "Holy shit, where is everyone? Are they dead? Did they leave me here?" And at that point in time, I guess that's when he kind of realized, okay, they're still around here somewhere, because the enemy's shooting, and they're not shooting at me because they don't know I'm here right now. So he must have figured out that they were at least somewhere nearby. And then the rest, and some of this gets, because Dan is the one who put this whole thing together and spoke with the amazing man who stitched together the two videos, the AC-130 and the drone video, so that there's literal, each person electronically tagged proof of who went where, who did what, and who didn't do what. So there's a period of time in there where I'm not exactly sure. John, he was attacked. He killed people hand to hand. He, had RPGs shot at the bunker, and for whatever reason, he freaking just kept on going. He shot people close range. He had, his face was bruised, so you knew he had been in a fight, and he won. Basically fighting for his life and shooting. And now, of course, this is a part that, as a civilian, it never would have even occurred to me. But I'm sure you know that, especially highly trained special forces guys know the difference between an American AK whatever and a Russian whatever. They know the sounds, they know the reports coming from them and what they mean. And someone had pointed out that as close as they were, they had to, and actually Slab actually said he could hear the gunfire at one point in time. He said, because they were saying, well, we thought it was red on red, meaning, the two enemies, they thought they were firing at each other thinking one was the American, which didn't make any sense, because by at that time it was coming up to be dawn, so that there's light and they're not that far away from each other. They would be able to know after two shots that, oh shit, that's my comrade. And
well, how far were the two bunkers apart? Did you ever get a distance?
Oh, I'm sure they ended up maybe, and it was up a hill, so maybe like 20, 30 feet maybe.
It wasn't far.
Right. No, they weren't that far. And so this person said they had to have heard the guns. And as I said, Slab said they heard the guns going off, and we thought it was red on red for an hour. And you hear an American weapon and you say nothing. You don't say, hey, holy shit, one of our guys might be alive up there, because they hadn't found Neil. So they said, maybe, they could have said maybe it's Neil, but I'm not going to say this. Well, maybe I will. I really, truly believe that if John had been a SEAL, there would have been more of an effort to make sure he was alive before they left.
I agree.
And so anyway, again, the angry sister, but that's just my opinion, and that from having learned a lot of this stuff. You hear this American gun going off for over an hour. Okay. Oh, then we thought it was celebration. They were celebrating for an hour. Come on. And then he's calling in airstrikes, and I think
they're blowing up all around John.
Yeah. And that's why the QRF commander thought, oh my God, we are the ones who killed John, but we didn't know he was there. See, that's the thing. One very major thing that I didn't mention, when Blaber was talking to them before the SEALs took over, there was a line of communication where everyone could hear everyone. And when the SEALs took over, they established a blue line only, so that only they could hear what was being said between the SEALs in Bagram and the SEALs on the mountain. So people on other mountains who could see this going on didn't know who they were, why they were there. They didn't know John was there. They had no clue. There was a combat controller on another mountain after John was left there who heard him. Any station, this is Mako 30 Charlie, which is the combat control call sign, anything with the Charlie. And he would answer and get nothing back. And John tried that, I think, 10 times, something. He heard him. Didn't know where he was, though. So he just went about he was getting full of shit, fired at too, where he was. So he would do his thing and then hear John and try to respond and then go back to doing his thing, because he didn't know John was there.
So the QRF, just so everybody knows, that's the second unit of Rangers and Green Berets that landed on the mountain. They also took fire and crash landed, correct? Or no?
Oh, yeah. Oh, for sure.
There was 20-some guys or 18 guys on that, right?
18 guys. They were called in. But they never rescued the SEAL team. The SEAL team kept going down the mountain. So to me, they came for nothing. They were called for nothing. But at the time, Slab probably thought, hey, we can probably they get back up there, they can take the mountain and we can be rescued. But that's not what happened. The helicopter came in, same spot, or, you know, right near there, and they immediately took fire also. The shit hit the fan, and yeah, they lost people for no reason. That the mission never should have happened. And I mean, there were some young guys, 18, 19 years old. They were children who, one guy said, he's like, I feel like a ranger, and immediately was killed right after that. And the thing is, from what I understand, QRFs a lot of times don't know what they're getting into, but they really had no idea. They had no idea what they were getting into, had no idea that John was there. After the fact, when they took the mountain and they were going around looking for Neil, they said, there's another American up here. Everyone was like, what do you mean there's another American up? Nobody freaking knew that John was there. And so and that's why the commander there thought he was the one who killed John, and that's not what happened.
So the QRF called in the airstrikes, not Slabinski.
No, Slabinski called in the airstrikes initially, because the QRF wasn't. John survived for an hour,
right,
before the QRF came in. So what happened was, you know, he had been shot, but his autopsy showed he had maybe 7 or 9 gunshot wounds, stab wounds, bruises, scrapes. You know, he had all this. He had expended all of his bullets, except for one cartridge in his Rhodesian vest that had taken damage, so he couldn't use it. And what happened after, it's amazing to me, an hour, you survive surrounded by enemy fighters, and you survive for an hour. And he had to have heard the QRF coming. You know, he's shot up. He's probably going to bleed out. But he was in the bunker, and he was kind of had that safety of the bunker. And when he had to have heard it, because it was, you're not going to not hear this lumbering helicopter Chinook coming up a 10,000-foot peak when there's probably no other noise but some gunfire. And he knew, you know, now obviously this is supposition, but he had to have known that helicopter was going to suffer the same fate as the 2 others before. And he knew that there was a dish, machine gun setup, and an RPG launcher that was, they wanted John's position, because that would have given them the perfect place to go out to shoot the helicopter coming in. So he was defending that position, and then he realized that the machine gun needed to be taken out too. And so he made the decision, as the helicopter, this is what really hurts. John died probably about 45 seconds after the helicopter came up. He had to have seen it. He had to have heard it. And he exposed himself, went prone on the ground to try to take out the machine gun, to basically lay whatever ground cover whatever cover he could for the helicopter, to give them at least a fighting chance to at least get set up. And that's when he took the fatal bullet, was when he was prone and turned his back on the guys behind him.
So thank you for sharing that. That is, I got chills. Your brother, and I want to put this in the context of people understanding the normal protocol for special operations. You know, if a SEAL team is going out, the SEAL team is the primary fighting force, right? The combat controller is not the primary fighter if he's attached to any unit. I don't care if it's SEALs or anybody. Right. So the situation as it unfolded was Slabinski getting out of the helicopter, then your brother, and your brother being the one to take the lead and go up and attack that first bunker.
Right. Killing
2 people, and securing that spot. Right. Once you take a spot, that's your spot. You don't give that spot up. Slabinski comes up, and listen, I want to make sure that I'm very clear. I do not think for a second that Britt Slabinski, in that moment in the fight, intentionally did anything in that moment to harm your brother or to create a situation for him. I do not think that for 1 second. I think Britt Slabinski fought like a fucking warrior.
Right.
There's no doubt about that. I'm not doubting his manhood or his warriorness.
Right.
I'm now doubting his character today. Right. But in that moment, he was a fucking warrior. Yes. And he went and fought. And what happened to your brother, I would assume, and this is just me, in the heat of the battle, you got to make quick judgment assessments. Mm-hmm. He made a quick judgment assessment that was wrong. And then what happened after that moment was then the beginning of the lie.
Right.
Your brother then, as the SEALs pull back and scale down the mountain, which you can see in the drone footage, mm-hmm. your brother in his position was then bombed by U.S. aircraft trying to take out the enemy fighters. Mm-hmm. Then the QRF comes in. Your brother, still in the fight now, after 15 minutes of being unconscious, gets back up and starts attacking the enemy some more. Sees that helicopter coming in. This is all very clear on the drone footage. The fight is now being redirected to your brother. Mm-hmm. As these guys are getting off the aircraft. A majority of the fight. There's still that group right by where the helicopter was, which is where I believe they probably took the fire. The immediate impact that killed the
some of them never even got off. They were killed right in the doorway.
But had it not been for your brother redirecting the upper bunker, the second bunker, and the other one behind him to him, more than 7 people would have died that day.
They probably all would have been dead.
And this isn't that result wasn't because of what happened with the SEALs fighting with your brother. That was a result of a poor assessment in the heat of the moment. And then what happens, I am not going to sit here and Monday morning quarterback a battle. Mm-hmm. I'm not. I refuse to, because I know these guys were in the middle of the shitstorm. Right. And when people are shooting at you, shit just happens. I get that.
Right.
My issue
about it later.
My issue about the whole thing was the cover up. Mm-hmm. And not what any SEAL or QRF member or your brother or helicopter pilot or anyone else did that day, or even the decision to land on the mountain. Bad decisions are made all the time.
Right.
It's just, are you man enough to fucking own it?
And that's the thing. If they had just owned it from the very beginning, we wouldn't be here right now.
No. And I don't think any of the other nonsense that has happened since would have happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
Once you're stuck in a lie, mm-hmm. and you get away with that lie,
right, it grows.
It becomes easier to do other things. Yeah. And I think that's where we're at. I think that's what happened. And I will tell you this, and this is, I believe at one point in time, we're going to have another conversation where I say that your brother helped solve Job's death.
That would be good.
That what happened to John and what was exposed to have been a gigantic lie and cover-up, mm-hmm. of epic proportions,
right,
was the piece that we were able to pull out of the tower and allow it to fall. And that's what I'm hoping for. I want that to be his ultimate second, third greatest act that he ever did.
Right.
Was that he helped uncover what is going on within the Navy SEALs as a result of what happened to him. Right. Now, so, well, that was intense. Thank you. I want to now go to the battle that your family had to wage in order to get your brother's story to be corrected, at least as much as the Navy SEALs and the Air Force were willing to correct it, by allowing him to get the Congressional Medal of Honor. Let's talk about how hard it was.
Allowing too. That is appropriate.
How hard was that process?
It was very difficult. Like I said, my husband and I tried different avenues, years into it, 05, 06, to get someone to, I had researched Medal of Honor citations from Vietnam and just the different ones that I could find. And John did way more than some of them did and way less than what others did. So I was looking at his Air Force Cross citation saying, this qualifies, in my unprofessional opinion, this qualifies. And Kenny was like on board with that too. He said, absolutely. So we tried different avenues and got shut down immediately, which is another ding, ding, ding for me. Like, okay. I mean, even the 24th tried at our request and they were shut down very quickly. And to me, that was very telling. Like, okay, so, that's just another little thing that doesn't make sense. And then we kind of let it go. And over the years, I've been like on this roller coaster, emotional. I can't blame Slab. I can't stand Slab, and then when Dan started uncovering, especially the Medal of Honor stuff with another service, the Navy, trying to squash the medal of a sister service, was like, as far as I know, it's never happened in the history.
Well, let's talk about that, because I think that's important to know the depth of the cover-up, the depth of how do we keep this thing quiet?
Well, the first thing was going back to that day, I guess they get interviewed immediately. They're after action reports, and you have Slab saying, I checked him. Well, how did you check him? Well, I looked at him, or I saw the laser. And then it comes out that there's a video. And it seemed like every little piece of information that came out, he had to change the story to fit that new information, and okay, I'm going to say this and people might get pissed at me, and I do believe that there is such a thing as the fog of war. I do believe that. But I also believe that in this case, that is an excuse. Okay, we don't want to explain that, so let's just call it fog of war. And everybody will be happy with that because it's a thing. And I do believe it is.
I agree.
But I feel like, that's what was thrown at the wall and it stuck. Oh, it was just fog of war. He didn't remember that then he said he rolled over onto him. And then he said, well, I must have mistaken Neil Roberts' body, because he was found not far from John. I must have mistaken him for John. This big burly guy with a red beard. John didn't have a freaking red beard, whatever. Anyway, again, fog of war stuff. That's the explanation. And then it's finally the video comes out and he never even went near John's body. He didn't even go, I think he stepped over Neil's maybe. And so it's like showing he never even tried to look at John. And yet all these different versions have come out that, I did this and I tried that. And oh, well, it's changed because of the fog of war, and I'm like, in this particular instance, I don't even want to hear that excuse ever again, which may or may not be fair to some people. But
sometimes the emotional impact that phrase has is just going to make you.
It makes me cringe now.
Yeah.
Like,
and that's normal.
I don't believe you. Yeah. Basically, it's the boy who cried wolf in reverse or whatever. But
yep.
So anyway. After Kenny and I had tried for the Medal of Honor, for just someone to look at it, look at it and give us a good reason why it's not a Medal of Honor. Because I remember when Kenny was still the first sergeant, and they were looking at the medal for John, and they were considering, should it be Air Force Cross, should it be Medal of Honor? And apparently there was a panel of 5 who determined this, and in the margins, I think it was 2 of them wrote Medal of Honor ? Like, so they were thinking along those lines. And it took extra long. Like, Jason Cunningham was the PJ in the QRF who was killed. And he was awarded the Air Force Cross, and was awarded very quickly, like in September of 2001. And we're still waiting and waiting. Like, what is the deal? Why is John's taking so much longer? And apparently there was that little argument going on, like, we can't give him the Medal of Honor. Well, so John ends up getting awarded the Air Force Cross in January of 2002. Or, yes. No.
03.
John was killed in March '03, and where was I going with that? He was awarded the Air Force Cross, and then it was kind of put to bed. Like nobody was thinking about it for a while, and that's when Kenny and I started saying, well, wait a minute, I think this should be looked at again, and we were shut down. And then in, I want to say 2014 or the end of 13, somebody...
We're talking 10, 11 years later.
Right.
Yep.
Somebody wrote for the Air Force Times an article, and it was about someone else who did something badass shit stuff. It saved like 80 people. Temple, I believe his name was. I think that's who the article was about. And said, what does it take for an airman to get the Medal of Honor? And it was just kind of what does it take? And at the Secretary of the Air Force at that time, Deborah James, read the article. Every morning she would read the Air Force Times, and so she wrote in the margin, what does it take? And she handed it off to her aides and said, find out. Let's, find out if there are any people who maybe should have been a Medal of Honor who weren't. And John was in that list of names. And that's kind of how it started. And once she heard his story, she was like leading the charge to get this to happen. And of course, she wanted it to be finalized during her watch. But then once the election happened and, she's out and a new person's in. But in that time, it had made it to the White House. After several tries, here's what happened. When the Navy heard, first of all, when John was awarded the medal, the Air Force Cross, this is where I forgot. Out of nowhere, and I've looked it up and I cannot find when or where this happened, but all of a sudden, about a year into it, I realized, or my mother told me, that Slab had been awarded the Navy Cross. And I went, what? He was the one who left him behind, and he's getting the same level? And that kind of pissed me off, but we know, but I couldn't find where it just suddenly happened. It was just there. All of a sudden he has this award. And so then fast forward to Deborah James and, asking the question, and the Air Force is looking into it. Navy gets wind of it because, they have to, first of all, with the Air Force Cross, they only used the interviews from, I think, 2 or 3 of the guys. That's it. Didn't interview anybody else. And he got the Air Force Cross off that. Well, fast forward to the Medal of Honor, they first tried to squash it. They tried to make it not even happen at all. They started, the Air Force said, hey, these statements that were given for the Air Force Cross were never signed because they were electronically sent. They were never signed physically by these guys. Can they sign them now? They refused to sign them. And then they started just different little things to try to get the Air Force to just give up on John's Medal of Honor. And then when that didn't work, they moved tactics to try to discredit John. Well, he went against, he wasn't following orders, and he put us in jeopardy. And
who's they? Would that be Szymanski?
Yes, Slab. And I'm sure Szymanski was, penning the narrative, basically saying John was our hero all the way up until 2014, and all of a sudden he's the bad guy who was not following orders, and he was rogue, and trying to discredit John so that he, just make the Air Force go, we don't really want to pursue this. When that didn't work, that's when they put Slab up for a Medal of Honor. They decided, well, okay, here's the deal. We can't have an airman who's not even a SEAL have a higher level of award than the team leader. So we're going to put Slab up for a Medal of Honor. they tried 3 times, and at 3 different levels it was denied. And then one morning, must have been in the middle of the night on the 11th hour, lo and behold, the package is sent to the White House. It's approved with John's. I can't even tell you how much that hurt and how disgusted I was that that's the level that they would go to try to minimize what John did and to try to cover up still after all those years later that they left him. Do I think they left him on purpose? No. But then you lied about it later, and you need, have some integrity, grow up, be a man, and just own what happened instead of trying to lie about it and cover it up. And then the absolute insult was that he received the Medal of Honor. Not only did he get that, he was allowed to receive it before John. So optically, it looks like, hey, I got mine first, so, mine is very validated, and well, this other guy got it after me, so, I read his citation, and part of the citation assigns John's actions to Slab. They're saying that Slab went and took out the 2 guys in the bunker, and at one point I saw him in an interview where they both went and took out the guys in the bunker. Slab's taking John's actions as his own, and that's in the citation, and that's disgusting to me. That's what they use to substantiate Slab's Medal of Honor. And from what I understand, in order to have something upgraded, there needs to be new evidence. John had new evidence because they had that AC-130 video that they finally found someone to stitch together pixel by pixel. It took them 2.5 years to get this thing done, where they could assign an electronic tag to every person so they know where everybody went, who went where, who did what. And there was no new evidence for Slab. And the person in charge said, well, we'll waive that requirement for him. They're saying, well, they waived it for both John and Slab. But boy, I'll tell you what, the Air Force had to go through hoops that were set on fire and 1 inch in circumference to get John's Medal of Honor, and Slab got his after 3 tries and some midnight meeting.
I think one of the things that looking at this now and piecing it together just on video evidence, stories I've read, articles I've read, conversations with you, when did the drone footage release? Was that after the Medal of Honor or prior to the Medal of Honor?
Made public?
Yeah, when the internet got a hold of it and became a whole big thing.
Well, I think the internet had bits of it beforehand, but it was the drone video that was less enhanced. But I want to say the one that was officially put out by the Air Force was before the Medal of Honor was awarded, but after
it was determined.
Right.
That's weird how that happens, because you can't undo it, right? It's not something somebody's going to undo, the Medal of Honor.
Right.
And this is just, my background's in human behavior and body language. That's my expertise. I've watched 7 or 8 different interviews with Slabinski. The one that is the most telling to me, that stands out as the anomaly, I wasn't prepared for it. So when looking at body language in human behavior, you have the baseline, and then you look for deviations off the baseline. And I've seen some baseline footage from him where it's, he was confident in the information he was putting out because it was practiced and rehearsed. And then you have the unprepared, caught off guard interview that he did with Fox after he got his Medal of Honor. Or I might even been the day or the day before, day after he got it. And I can tell you without a doubt he was under the influence of controlled substance. I don't know what, but it was very clear in his eyes, very clear in his the way he spoke. There was a slight lethargy about the way he spoke, and his answers were very indirectly avoiding of what the question is. What do you say about this report that you did this when Chapman did this? And his answer were based on my experience.
Right.
Like it was all very, he only had one canned answer for every question that was potentially going to reveal some level of culpability on his end.
Right.
That to me alone tells me that he's wrestling with that guilt, that he has that, and then the additional issues that have happened in his life, in his involvement in other incidences. I think that there's a layering effect of guilt and shame that is happening to him. And I would be more than happy to have Britt on this podcast to get to the bottom of it all. I know that'll never happen, but
yes, I wouldn't doubt it. I mean, I wouldn't count on it.
All I can say is this: no matter what the 2002 to 2018 period was, the lies, the deceit, the misdirection, the hoops you had to run through, the shame that they tried to put on you and your family, the intimidation, whether it was direct or indirect, the end result is this: your brother was a hero. Your brother saved 23 people's lives. Your brother chose, including theirs, chose to be the one who sacrificed. As you said many times, he had 5-6 opportunities to not be involved in what ended up being the last mission of his life.
Yeah.
And I can honestly say without a doubt that I've read many military books, many combat-related acts of heroism. I've seen a lot of the incidents that have gotten other people Congressional Medals of Honor. What your brother did was fucking amazing. The level of bravery, courage, patriotism, love that he had, whether it was reciprocated or not, and we found out later it wasn't, but in that moment, he loved those guys.
Oh yeah.
He loved Britt.
Fulfilled his, I will do whatever it takes to protect my team. And here's another little tidbit that's actually in the book, I think it's a footnote, that Dan had talked to someone who has been involved in all of the Medals of Honor for decades. And he interviewed her, and he asked her, and she knew what he was talking about right away. He didn't even, all he said was, there were 2, right? And she said, absolutely. He earned 2 Medals of Honor, not just 1, but they only talk about the 1. You know, he earned the first one when he saved their lives, when he attacked the first nest and basically allowed them to leave. And he earned the second one when he did what he did for the QRF that came in an hour later. So he really earned both of them. And they're saying, I've heard that it's the first Medal of Honor that's supported by video coverage. I don't know if that's true. There may have been, I heard somebody say something that could be something from Vietnam that had, but it doesn't happen that there's video, and there's proof for both of them. And I don't know, I've always said I was proud of him for his entire life. So him getting the Medal of Honor doesn't make me any more proud of him, but it freaking validates everything that we've known all along and felt in our hearts, that he did a hell of a lot more than shoot 2 people and die.
And he didn't die immediately, and he didn't die as everyone else was saving lives.
Yes, exactly.
He died. He died hours after they said he did.
Yeah, an hour after he. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And he fought like a fucking warrior. Right. And that's the shit that
He could have stayed in that bunker and hoped that the QRF would make it enough so that he could be rescued. He could have stayed in there. Instead, and as I've said before, it can be argued that it was, he didn't have a choice. He had to fight. Yeah, you're right. He did have to fight, but he fought it his way, and he took it to them. He didn't wait for them to come for him. He went to them, or when they did surprise him, he took care of business, and then he made the decision at the end to leave the security of that bunker to try to do something for the QRF that was coming in. He made that decision. He could have just stayed in there and waited. Probably still would have died because he was bleeding from his wounds, but he went out on his own terms, just like he lived his life on his own terms.
Very few people have a chance to be written about in history books.
Yeah.
Very few people will ever be folklore. They don't live significant. Not that they didn't live great lives, but they didn't live a life that was so fucking significant that actions that they did, things they accomplished or things they did in the name of something bigger than themselves. Mm-hmm. Your brother did that. Your brother, I literally, every day of my life, people ask me why I do all the things that I do. I have 5,000 jobs. I do help as many people as I can. It's because when it's all said and done, I want to be fucking remembered.
Right.
Like I want somebody to go, Matt Cubbler meant something in my life. And I can promise you this, there is an entire country that will, if they don't know it today, if they don't recognize the value of that Congressional Medal of Honor, the 2 that he earned, and what happened that day, they will. And if they don't, their kids are going to learn about it.
Right. Well,
generations are going to know about it.
It made my heart a little warm when Pete Hegseth from Fox News said to me, I want to make sure that my kids know about John Chapman before they know any freaking celebrity. He's like, the people like John Chapman are the ones that I want my children to read about. And that meant a lot to me that he said that.
Well, I can tell you that is going to be the goal after this podcast. I hope this goes viral. I hope people take the time.
Well, there will be some people who won't be happy with me, but I seriously don't care.
You have a moral conviction and a sense of right and wrong that goes beyond the politically correct world that people want us to live in. And I applaud you for that. I think you are a gracious and loving sister who will do anything for her brother and her other siblings, just like I would for my brother. And there isn't anything anyone can ever tell me to make me not tell my brother's story. And I'm sure there's nothing anyone will ever do or say about you that will make you stop telling your brother's story.
Right. And most of the time when I tell John's story, I don't mention the SEALs at all because I don't want any attention on them at all. I don't want them to have, I want the attention to be on John. We purposefully wrote the book. Yes, we tell the truth and let the reader make their own conclusions about things that happen. But the focus of the book is John and combat control. Because I wanted people to come away with John was a freaking badass and not, wow, those SEALs were jerks. I want the focus on John. I want people to think of him when they're done reading it and say, hey, you've got to read this story about John Chapman, not this story about the SEALs again. That was the focus of the book when we decided, because we were at first kind of thinking, yeah, we're going to nail them, and enjoy it. And there's stuff in there that, like I said, you draw your own conclusion, but it's the truth. And if the truth hurts, then I don't know what to tell you.
Well, one day the truth will set us free. And I am certain for a fact that no one can steal your brother's glory. No one can take away the actions that he gave that day in March of 2002 on Roberts Ridge in Takragar, Afghanistan. And I'm 100% certain that when the final stories are written about this era of our country, that the truth will be known. And your brother,
in the book, it'll be known in there. And we even heard about a story which was told to my mother by Slab, But people have seen the iconic, I call it iconic photo of John with the little Afghan baby, which I
Yep.
think it's behind me there. But in the middle of the war, I have it, you can see it right there.
Yep.
In the middle of, in February.
Show the cover of the book real quick.
So in February, before he died, they were on a mission to hunt down some warlord or whatever, and they got snowed in, and they had to kind of kick the elders out, the men of the village out of these basic little huts to ride out the storm. And they also had I forget what you call them, but locals, Afghan fighters. And the Afghan fighters wanted to kick out the women and children too. And John said, oh, no, you guys stay outside. The women and children stay inside. And they had like this little coffee can of heat. That's all they had. And their culture is you have guests, you feed them. They went through like half of their winter stores to feed these guys that had overtaken their village. And the mother, I mean, the culture is no male outside the family touches a girl. The mother took her daughter and placed her in John's lap. That's how much John won her over, and just because of who he was. That was who he was. And I can imagine him thinking of Madison and Brianna when he's got this little girl in his lap. And he had Slab take the photo John had a little black and white disposable camera. He's like, get the camera, because he knew the significance of that little girl being placed in his lap. And so when the storm passed and he finally, they were able to call for, hey, come get us. He's the one who said, hey, by the way, on your way here, I want you to bring, and they dropped off at least one pallet of food, of, whatever they could find, plus I think about 5 potbelly stoves for these people, because he knew that they had basically just relegated themselves to like a half of winter of starvation because they used all their food. So he had them bring all kinds of stuff for them, said, hey, I'm sorry, we can't help you bring it down and they said, it's okay, we'll take it from here, but that's, even in the middle of war, that's who John was.
I think that's a great place to end the show. And I can tell you that I'm honored that you came on my show. I'm honored that you got to share John with my audience and with me. I had what I believed was information and a picture of who he was, but I'm walking away almost 2 hours later with a complete different level of appreciation for not only John, but your family and the type of people that you are, as far as being patriotic Americans who just want the rightful truth to be assigned to your brother's legacy. And I truly do appreciate that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate you, like I said, reaching out to me, and I thank you for your service 2 times over, military and cop. I mean, I would never wish that on anyone in this day and age. And so, like you said, it's a calling. It's not just a job. And I thank you for that. And hopefully someday we'll actually meet. And
I'm sure we will.
Yeah. But I thank you so much for giving me
Oh, you're welcome. You're very, very welcome. Well, hang tight. We're going to talk off the air. I'm going to close out the show real quick. Sure. Everybody, thank you very much for listening and watching this episode of the 2 Dates in a Dash podcast. I am your host, Matt Cubbler, and thank you to Lori Chapman Longfritz for sharing the life of U.S. Air Force Combat Controller John Chapman, who died valiantly and heroically on the mountain of Takragar in Afghanistan in March of 2002 on what is now known as Roberts Ridge. If you haven't had a chance to look him up, please Google him. Look at the drone footage from that battle. You'll see how heroic John was that day and how the truth is finally known about the actions he took that day in defense of his nation and for the love of his teammates in order to make sure as many of them could go home to their families as possible. So thank you again. God bless, and take care of one another.